We're going to be talking about hiring and coaching strong product teams because you can't really do anything product-led or do anything growth-related if you can't hire, retain, and coach the right kind of product teams. So I'm joined here by Eve Robinson and Suhas Mangani. And if you guys could just briefly introduce yourselves, Eve.
Sure. So I'm Eve. I've been doing product for many years at this point. Actually started in media, similar to an earlier panelist and journalism side. Before moving into product at New York Times, New York Magazine, stayed there for a ton of years working on media-based products before going into startup land. And I worked for 2 food tech companies back to back. First was Plated and then Freshly, and now I'm currently in a resale marketplace for luxury items, which is fascinating because you have to think about the seller side and the buyer side, and it's quite complex.
Similar to Eve, my background is in marketplaces. Currently, I'm a group product manager at Airbnb. Prior to this, I was at Amazon, prior to that, Lyft, and prior to that, Microsoft. Mostly been in security, fraud, identity, trust kind of spaces. So making sure that trust works in a marketplace.
Awesome. So I think the question that we should probably start out with is what does your hiring process look like today? Suhas?
Like at Airbnb, it's very similar to what most of the recent product manager interviews are pivoting towards, which is like taking Facebook as a standard and then trying to replicate that by adding a few more things that are unique to a company. So something very similar, like the 3 core are product sense, or some companies call it product vision and strategy. The second one is goal setting and execution. This is where to see if a product manager can rally the team around few things that can be excited about and set goals around that and execute. And the last one generally is about leadership mindset. Like how do you lead teams without any authority? Can you get that done? Like can you engage engineering team? Can you engage design, marketing, sales? Whatever needs to be done, like can you bring that leadership aspect? Those are the 3 main ones. And then there are like company specific ones like cultural fit, core values, things like that.
So for those main ones, what are you are you asking them specific questions? I just wanted to kind of do a double click on that.
Generally, I look at 2 things. One, recent past, like 12 months to 18 months, if the candidate had had a project where they can showcase that.
Join you guys.
Sure, sounds good. And then a hypothetical one, just to make sure they can think well on their spot, on the go, and be able to articulate their ideas in a structured manner. So that's what I generally look for. And these 3 type of interviews provides different aspects of what is needed to be successful in a product manager, especially irrespective of whether you're a junior or middle or senior. These are the 3 things that I generally look for.
Excellent. Eve?
So I've worked in small to mid-sized startups for quite some time now, and I would say our process is a little bit more fluid and flexible. We're not as structured as an Airbnb or an Amazon would be. Generally, we just go through screening meeting with 3 to 5 people within the product marketing data teams. And then I think a big topic of discussion I've had with other PMs is whether you have to do a take home or do an in-person. And I, for a couple of reasons, I lean towards the in-person versus the take-home. One, it's easier on the candidate. You don't have to ask them to spend a ton of time for a position they might not get. And I think you get more of a sense for how they think when you're doing it in person or now over a Zoom call. So there's usually some sort of problem just present up front. It's very high level. We don't give much data about it. And we ask you to talk through how you would go about solving the problem and asking questions along the way, which can sometimes be intimidating and people forget to do that. So we just constantly encourage the questions like, what would you want to ask us? What would you do next? What kind of data can we provide you? I think that just having an hour with somebody speaking directly about it, you just glean a lot more about how they think versus, a PowerPoint presentation or something.
So you just touched on something. You said an hour. How long are your interviews?
I would say if it's like one-on-ones, 30 minutes to 45. If it's an exercise, usually an hour.
Typically 2 phone screens of 45 minutes each. Then on-site is about 3 45 minutes and 4 30 minutes.
Got it.
Lots of lots of interviews.
Sounds about like all comes together about a day.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. So, by the way, I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about myself and why I'm moderating this one. So, I've spent over 20 years in product management. I've founded 3 startups myself. At least one was successful. I've also worked in larger companies, Viacom being a very notable one. Now I'm over at Cognizant running product management over there for a 100-person team across just about every continent, ex-Antarctica. I also run the product group, which is the largest product management meetup where we've got over 20,000 people here in New York City. We have another group over in London. Altogether, we have over another 30,000 for that. I also run a mentorship program in over 25 countries around the world for product managers. My role at Cognizant is I'd say when someone had asked earlier, what's next after head of product? My job at Cognizant is my dream job. I couldn't think of anything more that I would want in that. I spend my time thinking about what product management is 10 years from now and beyond. And when I'm not thinking about that, I'm thinking about how do I build the best teams? How do I do recruiting? How do I make it a great environment for all my associates that I have? And so when I had the opportunity to moderate this, I was very excited to do this. This is a topic that I am very passionate about. So I've got a lot of good questions for both of you. And as you post questions in the Slido, feel free to direct them to any of us. Or the panelists, anyone. I'm happy to answer 1 or 2 questions, but I'm hoping that you guys are going to be doing most of the talking today. So with that said, I wanted to move to have you seen much of a difference in hiring between small companies, large companies? Do you approach it differently?
Right. When I was at Lyft, that was a pretty small company, like 1,500 people or maybe 2,000. But Microsoft, Amazon are massive. Airbnb is somewhere in between. For product managers, I think unless you're interviewing for startups, like really startups, like less than 100 people company, the interview process itself feels like it's getting more standardized. What to expect. One reason I think is because like 10 years ago, product management was not well defined. But I think now it's a lot more well-defined than it was before. So the expectations are more clearer. Still not everything under the blue sky expectation, but still it's clearer than before. So because of that, I think interview processes are getting standardized. Microsoft, the interview process was heavily dependent on team, like depending on who your manager is and what processes they follow. Amazon was very well structured, same set of interviews for everybody who comes through the gate. Same was with Lyft and same is with Airbnb.
Eve?
So I moved into product at the New York Times, which is a massive company. People interview there. It takes months to hear back. And so I think the main difference between a large company and a small one is speed of just like start interviewing, you're hired, you're starting within 2 weeks, ideally, like not taking a break in between your last job and this one. And I think the main difference isn't really in the process as to who you're looking for, because they're very different skill sets. I know a lot of it resonated in the panel I saw earlier today of talking about how communication skills at a large company influence being able to make a case is really important, whereas when you're at a startup or a smaller company, being comfortable with change, what you're working on yesterday might be completely irrelevant the next day. And so I think it's different mentalities, different skills, more so than the process being completely different.
Let me continue with you, Eve. What do you see as the must-haves when hiring, and how are you testing for them?
I would say a must-have it's more of a personality trait of diligence, being able to look at quantitative, especially at a smaller place, it's just always going to outweigh the qualitative, and being able to pull out the insights from something that it's just a data set, and sometimes you have to combine them, and being able to read that, you don't necessarily need to pull it yourself, but I love to hire PMs from data, like people who can write their own SQL queries, people who are just used to doing that and used to producing those insights, and then becoming a product manager. I think that's a great career path.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so you mentioned a little bit earlier. Of the stuff that you were talking about, were there any kind of must-haves you'd want to single out?
Must-haves generally change for me based on who else is on the team already and what do I need to make up the team as a whole. So as a team, I look for certain things and then look for the missing pieces. That way, I end up with quite diverse skill sets in the team versus everybody having exact same skill set. That way, we all can learn from each other and grow as a team versus having one star player and others looking up to them, which is good for that star player. But the star player itself may not have much growth left, and they would churn away. And then once they churn away, then the whole team will collapse. So,
To add on to that, I think there's also a key of like what you don't want in a PM, and I think a big part of something is I try to suss out just how people answer questions is ego. Because I think product management attracts a lot of people who are like, oh, it's a powerful job, right? Or like you get so much control over creating the product, and I can just like order people around, where that is definitely not what you want a product team to be. And so when you're interviewing product managers, it's always about listening, of how they answer or how they talk about their past experience of like the product that I had, or like, are they including designers or engineers? Do they call engineers resources? Like, it's just small things that I try to suss out.
I like that. Do they call engineers resource? I like that. I like that. Yeah, we have a list of red flags that we look for too in our interviews. Another area that I'm really passionate about is building diverse teams. And so as you kind of are working through, what do you do what are you doing in your recruiting process to ensure building of diverse teams or keeping of diverse teams?
Right. I didn't know the tools till a few years ago. There are few things that once, when consciously done, helps bring in, reduces the biases. Two things I look for. One is not starting to interview as soon as the role opens up, but give enough time so that you build up a pool of resumes, then start interviewing. That gives chance for, generally when you start interviewing soon after the role opens up, then people who are connected to you, very likely like you, would apply the first, and then you'll have a team that just looks like you and talks like you, behaves like you. That's good to have in some places, but not in a tech world where you do want diverse opinions, diverse thought process. So one tool that I always use to keep the role open for some time before start interviewing. And then while interviewing, look for what this person brings to the table from what's missing from the team perspective, not necessarily just what this role is needed, what is needed for this role to be successful. I mean, generally you'll get multiple people who can be successful, who can do the job well, but it's about what's missing in the team and how do I add that piece.
Eve?
Yeah, I think this is a great question topic, and one I've experienced a lot, especially in New York, where, you know, my last couple of companies, it hasn't been rare for me to be the only woman in the room, and diversity, and I think it comes down to having policies that allow for flexibility and having the company bought in. So we've all heard or experienced heads of diversity being hired, but a year later you see no change in the company or the culture. And so I'm thinking about what my current company, Tradesy, does. It is by far the most diverse company I've worked for, and I think that's because the co-founders and the head of people have really invested in this, and so that commitment to it just flows throughout the entire recruiting process. Like, we're trying to get more people of color, more women. There's tons of women who work there. My whole team is women primarily at this point. So I think it's critical to have the founders committed to this, and like that ethos flows throughout the entire company, so that you're not just hiring people who look like you, which I think is especially risky in startups, or it's a couple of founders. They tend to hire people who think like them, who look like them. But I think it's there's no like quick technique or solution other than.
So it's good that it's built into the culture of the organization.
Yep.
Are there any checks in the process in recruiting? Are there is there any part of the process where there is where diversity is kind of called out as an important focus?
I think it's in the initial recruiting, when the recruiting team is really trying to get like a diverse set of candidates. And the one thing that I remember mentioning when I first started at Tradesy 6 months ago, they used to be based in LA, but now they're 100% remote. And that they've credited that with like opening up the pool of candidates to a much wider area. Just engineers all over the country now who might not be in LA or like New York necessarily.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I just wanted to, one of the things that we do with respect to diversity is we make it so that no person can actually hire another candidate. We separated the data collection phase and the decisioning phase. And so for us, what that meant also is everyone involved in the process is there to collect very specific data. It then goes to a committee. In the committee, there's one person dedicated as a bias buster. That's their whole job. Their whole job is looking for any kind of bias and any kind of issues like coded language, anything else. And that person also gets trained in that role. And so then it has to be a consensus decision of a diverse group of people about the answers to the questions that were asked by another set of people. And so everyone's evaluated, are you asking good questions? Are you getting good answers? And then separately, the committee then will make a decision. If they don't have good data, they send it back to re-ask the candidate. So we keep that we keep it separate, and we do have a very specific focus on diversity, at least in that sense.
Would that slow things down, Jeremy? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
For us, so our interview process altogether, you could do it in one day, and generally we spread it over 2 days, and then the hiring committee basically meets once a week. So the longest you're going to wait is 2 weeks if you just get it like at the farthest ends of that. But it doesn't really slow it down, and it also gives us. It allows us equity amongst everyone. Like I know everyone is coming in at this level 5. Everyone at level 6 have the same skill set, and we're looking at the data. We're not looking at the person. We're not looking at anything else, and we're making kind of that consensus decision in a room where you're supposed to argue with each other if you disagree until we can figure out what the disagreement and come to a consensus view.
Makes sense. Early on, that's the second tool I was leaning towards, which is when your boss doesn't pushes you to go make a hire quickly so that you can get the work done, making that room, like you talked about, like founders, making that room so that you can take whatever long it takes to generate this sufficiently big pool of candidates before you start interviewing and make an offer would help grow the diverse team well. Whenever your boss asks you to go fill the position because work needs to be done, that's where you'll end up hiring the first person who walks through the door. And that may not help the long term.
Awesome. I'm gonna take a few questions from the audience, and I'll be jumping back and forth. So the first question I've got here is: any tips for a startup implementing a first-time PM team? Any processes, meetings, or things that should be required? It's probably like a book written on that whole question there. Eve, go for it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say for a team that doesn't have or didn't have a product manager before now, I think one is setting up a discovery process, because I think a lot of teams as they grow focus on like PRDs or specs, which I think can be useful in a waterfall implementation or like much larger companies. But the core responsibility of a product manager, especially in a startup, is are you building the right thing for the customers and the business, and making sure that like the engineers, the product designers understand the role of a PM, and just including them in that process, because sometimes people think their responsibilities will be taken away from them in some sense, like the things they do now. So I think just having those conversations up front, making sure everybody's clear as to what the role is, getting all of the data in place. If there's not great analytics, like that's the first thing a product manager should do. Like you need to understand what's happening and understanding the why and talking to customers and get that in place before you should be doing anything else with the product.
Yeah, Suhas, you have anything to add to that one?
First time team bringing in a PM is always interesting. It basically means PM can do nothing or everything. And I think there'll be a lot of ownership on a product manager to set that expectation and balance it. Otherwise, they'll have a terrible work-life balance, and team may get a lot out of them, or team may reject them because they're bringing too many churn to the team. For a startup specifically, CEO becomes their first product manager. And if a CEO is bringing a new product manager into the team, then they better be very well aligned and then understand the roles and responsibilities between what CEO wants to do versus this first PM on the team wants to do. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of overlap.
You got to have a strong backbone if you're that PM.
Right.
When hiring junior team members, what educational material do you recommend sharing with them to help them develop their skills? Suhas, you want to?
If I get this question correctly, junior team members as in PMs who are being like first-time PMs, I'm assuming?
Let's go with first-time PMs.
Okay. Education material-wise, off late there are quite a few certifications and programs that are coming up that specialize in giving like 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks courses in PM. I would recommend them to take those. And then there are a few books that I would recommend that helps with the PM interviews, but they also talk about how to be successful as a product manager. So I would recommend those. Otherwise, I've also heard people asking if MBA is the right path to go to be a product manager. I would say no. MBA is too expensive for the skills that you need for a product manager. Taking up any project where you can deliver end-to-end, even if it means coding it yourself or finding a finding a freelancer and taking their help to deliver a project as a personal project, that would do too.
Eve?
My go-to is always Marty Kagan, Read Inspired. I read that when I first went into product. My manager asked me to go through that. We read it as a product team. I think there's a lot of great founding principles there. I have yet to come across a company that runs their process exactly as he advocates for, so there will be some flexibility. I also highly recommend a SQL class. I think it's pretty straightforward, or any kind of just entry-level engineering class, whether it's front-end or back-end, depending on your interest, just to be able to be more comfortable speaking with engineers. A lot of smaller companies don't have a lot of data analysts, so if you can do it yourself, that's a huge benefit. It'll speed things up for you.
That's a good point. I second your thing. Don't do the MBA for that reason. I would also say I would go further. And as a person who created the curriculum for General Assembly and the New School and CMU's Business School product management courses, I would also emphasize that you shouldn't do those either to get into product management. You should do them if you want to learn and you think the teacher's going to teach you. Other than that, don't go for those certifications to think that it's going to jump your career ahead, because at the end of the day, it's the skills that you're demonstrating, it's the value you're delivering. How do you balance the technical product management versus how do you balance technical product manager versus product manager, and how the responsibilities lie?
Right. I have always worked in security, fraud, trust kind of spaces, where it's expected out of product managers to be very technical. But when I was at Amazon, there were clear different titles for product managers in tech versus product managers not in tech. I think one thing product managers not in tech did extremely well is go-to-market strategies. That I have seen in all my teams. My focus is mostly on how to get security right, how to get identity and trust right. It's less about the product value itself. It's these add-ons that makes it comfortable to use a product. So that's where I see that I'm not that good at go-to-market strategies and coming up with this innovative new product that adds significant value to customers. I think that's where non-technical product managers will do, expected to do very well, but not so much for the technical product managers. I don't know if that's different in your case.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the role in the company. There's a lot of companies, I'm sure Google still requires it. You had to have an engineering background to be a product manager. You couldn't do it without it. As somebody who does not come from a technical background, I think there's a lot of consumer-facing roles, and it's easier to get into product management if you move into it within your current company. Otherwise, it's a pretty, in my experience and hearing from other people who've tried to make that transition to product, it's a little bit harder to apply for an associate product manager outside of your current company, and that's how I found a lot of people move into it. There's also companies like Tradesy has this great program called TAP, where we offer people insights into areas they might be interested in, but they're not working in. So whether it's marketing, whether it's product, whether it's engineering, we've hired a lot of our customer service representatives into those roles. So starting in a QA role, so you get that technical experience, or hiring into an associate product manager role. There's a lot of great pathways that some companies offer to actually teach and invest in their employees to move you into those more technical roles.
When hiring, are you looking more, if you were to categorize it, more at the hard skills or the soft skills? Like, why are you leaning towards one or the other? Let's start with you, Eve.
I lean towards the soft skills. I think just those data skills and being able to do the analysis are critical, but I think almost anything in product can be learned if you're passionate enough about it and willing to do the work outside, read about it, take classes. I'm sure you can do a SQL course online. And there's so much interpersonal relationships with being a PM. You're working with product designers, analysts, executives, engineers. There's so many different types you have to work with. I think those soft skills are pretty critical.
Suhas?
I generally want both. Most PMs have to get things done through others, for which soft skills are absolutely necessary, without which you will be a great visionary, but nobody around you to get things done. At the same time, the hard skills is what is used for coming up with these hypotheses, so using data to back it up, doing your research to bring the right things to the table and convince everybody that this is the thing that everybody should build. So for PMs, I would say one should have a bit of both, but they can have hard or soft skills as their strengths, but then the minimum is they need to have both to some extent.
Do you have that same philosophy whether or not you're hiring a junior person versus a senior person, or how does that change? How does that change for you?
For senior, the role gets soft skills are more useful because there you are not coming up with the hypothesis, but rallying troops to get things done, especially higher up you go. Junior, you're expected to know your problems, come up with solutions, back it up with data and things like that. So probably for a junior, I would look for more hard skills, and as senior, they get more soft skills.
Is that the same for you?
I would say it's probably the same, yeah.
All right. So, hiring is expensive. Replacing people is expensive, or so I've heard. So I guess a good follow-up question to a lot of this recruiting, what are you doing to retain people, to retain product managers?
Right. That's a very good question, especially the current market, which is super hot. Hard to get any interviews, any people through the interview loops. Couple of things. One, making sure there is a quarterly connects to make sure everybody on my team feels that they are being heard in terms of what they want to do in their career, and they see a plan to go from point A to point B. And then having that clarity on what this point A is, and having clarity on what that point B is, and then tracking the milestones in between, and having these quarterly connects to make sure and communicate that I, as a manager, my job is to help them go from point A to point B. It can be two different levels, so that they can do a ladder up, or it can be about acquiring a new skills that they want to do, or they want to work on a new technology, whatever that is, but identifying point A and point B. The second thing I do consciously is making sure that their work-life balance is matched well with the impact that they want to generate, and enabling them to set it versus me setting it for them. Some people may want to over-focus on impact. Some people want to focus more on work-life balance, and they both are not a trade-off. But when enabled, they can set the expectation, and I don't have to incorrectly set that expectation for them. So those are the two things that generally work well for me.
Eve?
Well, I think the biggest one is, are you paying fairly, right? Like a lot of times it does come down to money. Are you being treated like your coworkers are on par with your colleagues? And I think the other thing is very similar of, are you creating the environment where they can thrive on an individual level? So some people really love independent, complex problem solving where they have a lot of focus time. They're not necessarily constantly interacting with other people, but others really thrive on, very collaborative sessions where you're whiteboarding for hours at a time. So like what motivates each person to do what just makes them get up every day. And I think the other thing that is frankly a struggle in startups is career development and advancement, because they are such small companies. People, they want to move up, and a lot of them believe in the flat, no hierarchy, which I personally haven't ever seen in actuality, but there's a lot of talk about how we don't have a hierarchy at certain companies, but people want to feel like they're advancing, and so they need some way to feel that, even if it's not a promotion or like a title change, as long as they feel like they're learning and they have the opportunities to do that and support, which isn't fully in your control as a manager all the time.
Yeah, a little bit of interesting food for thought that I wanted to share. There's a survey that just recently came out from Microsoft. So they did a work from home survey, work trend index they called it. At the beginning of the pandemic, they just refreshed it and sent it out a couple days ago. And the reason I wanted to share this, I think this gives us all kind of pause for thought when we're thinking about some of the areas on retention. In that, I just want to read this one part. They found that the top 5 reasons employees are quitting their jobs, and this is in order: personal well-being or mental health, followed by work-life balance, followed by risk of getting COVID, but next by lack of confidence in senior management and leadership, then lack of flexible work hours or location, and then number 7 in that list, so I'm skipping a little bit, number 7 in that list is not receiving promotions or the raises I deserved. It's the first time in I think it was decades that one hasn't been number 1. So it's definitely something I think for all of us, and I personally don't have I'm asking the question. I don't have the answers.
I think the first 3 are really interesting to me, because we were talking about it earlier. The whole 100% remote, a lot of companies aren't back in the office. I think there is so much lost in working 100% remote. There's a lot of flexibility, but I think a lot of like that burnout feeling, at least for me in my last job and why I eventually left, was the lack of boundaries, the lack of social engagement, those like chats of like ideas and like talking to your coworkers, and that like lack of connection, I think is a huge factor to burnout in the past couple of years. So I work for a 100% remote company right now, but I think the hybrid model is really where it's going to be.
The thing I wanted, their first study, if you're not familiar with these 2 studies, the first study found that the managers loved it. It was great. They had all this free time. They could get work done. The associates, the ICs, independent contributors, hated it. They weren't getting the guidance. They weren't getting the learning, and they just felt like they were in the dark the whole time. The follow-up, this one, now the managers don't like it because they're not having the interactions with the leaders in the organizations and their social connections. They don't have the influence that they need to follow through for their teams. So it was nice that they had the free time, but that also meant now the CEO's not talking to them anymore, and the rest of the C-suite's not talking to them anymore. And so I think to your point, for the hybrid model, like everyone's realizing, oh, these relationships were useful. But I think everyone would just like to do the relationships at home, like come to my house and we'll take turns.
There's just something you can't replicate unless you're in person, like physically, and building those relationships. And
it took us 2 years to learn that one, but yeah.
Yeah, like especially if you're starting out your career and as a manager trying to get somebody promoted or like advocate for them, and your manager's like, I don't know who this person is. Like I've never seen them. Like who is this? So I think there's challenges there.
Excellent. Just thought that was interesting food for thought there. So I want to move on to coaching. So let's just start with just some simple definitional. What does coaching mean to you?
I often compare coaching with mentoring, thereby explain coaching. Coaching is doing the right thing needed for the role, even if it means you as the IC don't like it. Mentoring is doing what you think you need, even if it means not the right thing for the role. As a coach, my goal is to win matches. For that, if you have to step up, that's the expectation I need to set and manage. While if I'm mentoring somebody, it's not about winning the game, it's about you feeling doing something so that it eventually contributes to winning a game.
Eve?
I think at its core, it's about leading them in the right direction without telling them what to do. I think that's the core of coaching. I think as a first-time manager, the natural tendency is to like, okay, well, let me show you how to do this, and like doing it for them, which is a terrible as a manager. And so I think coaching is really about like if somebody's coming to you with a question or you're seeing they're struggling with something, start asking questions. And like as you ask questions, they start to think about how they might think about it differently versus necessarily like gently guiding somebody in coaching, which is very similar in like a sports scenario versus, you know.
So Suhas brought this up. He mentioned mentoring as well as a contrast to coaching. Do you have a distinction?
Between coaching and mentoring?
Yeah. Yes.
Mentoring seems more to me like personal advice, almost like a life coach, where I see coaching as more like you're in the background, you're guiding them and like making sure they don't like veer completely off course, but you're letting them figuring it out on their own. You're just kind of setting the goalposts, so to speak. I don't even like sports. I don't know why I'm using this sports.
The coach is very closely associated with sports, so it comes out.
I've heard there's coaches in the sports. I don't know. What are some strategies that you employ in coaching your product teams?
Right. Coaching starts with what's expected to be successful for this role, and then mapping that back, how the person who's doing the role, their strength plays into it, or the opportunities, identifying opportunities that are needed to fulfill that role's full potential. So setting that expectation and then listing down the strengths that would do well and the opportunities that needs to be improved upon. That sets the first expectation setting. After that, it's about tracking through a timeline how this person feel enabled that they're working towards it, and me doing whatever it takes to help them get to that place.
Eve, some strategies?
I mean, I think it goes back to pausing and asking questions. For example, somebody who is more junior I managed previously, things would get really fast, and this was when we were remote, would just Slack me, and my natural tendency was just to answer, like give an answer to a question. But instead of that, it's pausing and being like, well, what do you think? And it's kind of teaching her that she can do this if she would trust herself. And instead of like giving her an answer, she'd be like, oh, I'm supposed to figure this out by myself, or like just pause for a second. So I think just making sure as a manager you don't give in to that, like, I know how to do this, so I'm going to tell them how to do it, but instead you like pause and ask questions and push them to figure it out on their own.
Excellent. I lost my place. How do you coach PMs without a technical background? Eve?
I think I think a main thing I would say about coaching is don't be afraid to ask what you might think is a dumb question, especially I think most engineers I've worked with are more than happy to explain concepts. They're used to more business people asking questions that are very simple. And so I think making sure that they're learning on the job and getting that technical background and not just like hearing something and repeating it, but really understand what that concept means. Like if they don't know what an API is, like understand what that is, like, and taking the time to have some of those things so you can have these conversations.
Suhas?
There seems to be an implicit assumption that one needs to be technical to be a good PM. But in my team, there's a diverse set of them. Some are technical, some are not. As long as PMs, the minimum set is understand customer pain points, articulate that in a way that can be explained to engineers, that's the minimum bar needed for being technical. Beyond that is a bonus. So coaching PMs without technical background, I would focus on being able to articulate customer problems in a way that team understands. And we'll only focus on that, and everything else is they can learn on their own.
All right. And back to you, Suhas. How has remote work changed your coaching process?
Remote work basically puts more ownership on managers to build the trust, which otherwise was relatively easy over coffee meetups, walks. You start building the rapport with your directs. With remote work, it's extra ownership on managers to make sure that to over-convey that the team has to coexist together and there is room for making mistakes, room for growing together, room for learning, and that ownership is more on manager to do it well. Except that, everything else is about communication, that's okay, but it's about building this trust and a safe space. Now it's that much more harder, but has to be done.
And from a fully 100% remote company?
I think it's critical to have some sort of space, maybe it's half an hour every week, to just have banter. Like, I think people are a little over the Zoom happy hour concept and like having large groups of people. But because we don't have this, like you run into each other in like getting coffee, like you don't have that natural banter. It's all like, it's very task driven now. Like you're just working. I think you have to set up time to get to know them, to understand what motivates them, like what they like, what they don't like, or else you're not going to fully understand how to retain them and what opportunities they want necessarily.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think 25% of every one of my meetings is just silliness and joking for the first quarter of every single meeting. All right, so we've done some recruiting, we've coached them, but I think the reason we were coaching them was we were hoping to have a strong product team, or one way of describing it. What does it mean to have a strong product team? Let me go to you first, Eve.
I think there's a few areas. I'm a huge advocate of OKRs, so we all have our own OKRs as a product team and as product managers. So, I mean, one very clear, easy way is, are we meeting our key results as product managers, as business owners of certain areas? But I think the other part is softer of a strong product team is also very supportive versus necessarily competitive. So if somebody's running into an issue, do the other product managers come in and help out? Do you have a team that's willing to do, like, just drop things and help them, even if it means longer hours for them? And I think that's really what a strong product team is. in addition to like the hard OKRs, are you meeting your goals?
And that's great. Suhas?
I expect every PM on my team, including me, to do three things. One, or not three things, like manage these three things together. One, how do we add value to customers? Second, how do we manage expectations from our leadership? It can be just our team manager or skip bosses or all the way to CEO. The third piece is what do really team want to build in terms of their career growth? Team as in the engineering team, the design team, the data science team. PM's job is to align these three all the time. Ideal is all three should be aligned. Worst case, two of the three needs to be aligned. And if for every project, if all three are aligned, then I would say I have a perfect team. Worst case is like 80% of the time, if I can get two of the three things aligned, I'll call it a win.
It wasn't just a strong team, he called it a perfect team. So just noting that one. Is there anything to the structure of the teams that you think feeds into them being a stronger team?
I'm very passionate about this. Well, I was thinking as you were asking this question, like there's product teams in terms of like product managers working with each other and supporting each other, but a product team to me is very much that empowered product team model of there's a clear objective, there's a problem the team is trying to solve as a product manager, engineers, product designers, usually maybe a data person's in there. And there has been a move recently that I've seen, at least at smaller companies, where there's not a ton of people to do a ton of things, and so we've moved into this more project model, where I think that just disempowers a lot of people, and in the product role especially, and turns people into waiting for things to come to you and people to tell you what to do versus taking the initiative that's so important to a PM. Of like, you need to be somebody who like goes after things. And so I think there's a very clear distinction for me of the empowered product team where you're giving the team a problem, but you're not telling them how to solve it. Versus you might weigh into it, you might inform the roadmap, but the roadmap coming down in like a command and control model where you're more acting as a project manager, which I think still happens very often today. And I understand why smaller companies move to that, so it's just a better use. There's only so much money you have, so much runway as a startup. And you want to make sure that you're working on the right things. But I'm a huge proponent of making sure you're giving people problems, not telling them exactly how to solve them.
Suhas?
Similar to Eve, a product manager generally is expected to do like big thinking, vision, strategy, come up with big bets, and they're also expected to execute and deliver. Junior PMs are expected to be good at latter, or at least be good at latter, and a senior PM is expected to get better at the former, which is thinking big, vision, strategy, thereby find adjacent problems to solve or whole new problems to solve. So setting them up so that they are like, as I grow and as I look up to leaders, I look for more frameworks and directions versus solutions and answers. Same goes with the rest of my team. Like as they grow in their career, I would want them to grow in like creating frameworks, but not solutions. I mean, solutions are good. In addition to that, frameworks are necessary to grow in next levels.
So when you're talking about having a goal or being organized around a problem, in some places you have a dedicated team where they own not just a problem, but like a theme, a problem, a theme-based approach. So they're figuring out like what are the next set of problems. In other places, they have groups that come together temporarily, like a working task force, where they will kind of self-organize or semi-self-organize around a problem. They're not being told how to solve it, but here's a new problem. Here's our backlog of problems. You guys are free. Get to know each other.
So I think that model has a lot of appeal, especially like when something critical comes up for a company. I've personally never worked in that. I've only worked in the pod structure of people are dedicated to this area of the business for 6 months to a year, or overseeing maybe an aspect of the business, but at least the designers and the engineers are kind of coming and going in more of a project base. I don't know, Suhas, have you had experience with that?
Right. I think the former you talked about is more of a working group concept.
Yep.
The latter is a team concept. Working groups works well in startups where you don't know whether a company is going to exist 6 months later or a year later. There, the need of the hour is to come together, solve a specific problem, even if it means that you're coming from different parts of the company, even if it means you're doing a role that's totally irrelevant to your job title. That's when the working groups work really well, because you can accomplish a highly time-sensitive task really well. Team structure or the pod structure works well when you're thinking about multi-year strategy where a metric needs to be moved over a longer period of time. There, you don't need people who are just committed for 3 months, but you need people who can think about long-term and then set up the right systems. But that's generally not startups. That's generally like well-structured big companies with long horizons and deep pockets.
Awesome. So I think we've got time for one more question. So if you're looking 5 years out or so, and also taking into account this post-pandemic world, maybe hopefully post-pandemic world, I'm not putting a mask back on. What changes do you expect to see in the definition of a strong product team? Eve?
I mean, I will say what I would hope to see. I would hope to see, even at smaller companies, I think the transition from a very small startup where like you're all involved in everything, you're all at stand up in the morning from 10 people to like 100 or so is a difficult one. I would hope more smaller companies and startups see the value of letting their product managers and listening to the people who are on the ground coming up with ideas and moving to that more empowered model versus, I still see a lot of job requirements of writing specs and PRDs. And I think, again, in a larger company that's critical, but I think in a smaller company, it's more about, are you building the right product for the right people and the business, which is more about discovery, building a prototype, doing wireframes, like getting out there and going to, maybe now we can do this again, going to a coffee shop to like put something in front of somebody and being like, does this appeal to you? Like doing that legwork versus about like very specific feature definition to pass over and like throw over the wall to engineering. So I really hope it continues to evolve in that more of like collaborative system, which hasn't evolved as much as I would have hoped by this point.
Suhas?
5 years, too long.
10 then.
10 years definitely will all be in space. But anyways, till then, I think PM's role would evolve as companies evolve, and very likely companies will continue to evolve to being more remote, more geographically dispersed, coming together once a quarter or a few times a year kind of a deal. With that, I think PM's role will also evolve to match to that, where, like for example, my current team is spread between Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and I think that spread will only start becoming more and more widespread, not just for these tier 1 cities, but all over. And it also need not be localized to one country, but multi-countries across the globe. With that, I think the benefits that comes across is having more diverse teams that not only are like, in a typical sense, match the diverse definition, but also have deep understanding of local markets and can bring in that perspective. I think from that perspective, the companies that have global products, I think will continue to do extremely well, and they will benefit from having this PM team that's spread across the globe. For the companies that are solving local problems, I think they will continue to exist, but the companies which are more global in nature would likely be more present 5 years from now. And 10 years from now, I guess we'll all be in space and working from Mars, maybe.
All right, Elon. So anyway, I want to thank our panel, Eve and Suhas,
Thank you so much,
for our talk on recruiting and hiring and retention
Thanks, Jeremy.
and building a strong team. Thank you.